Taemin walked through the crystal halls of Nexus Prime, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The morning light from 3 suns painted rainbow patterns on the walls, but he barely noticed. In 2 hours, the Galactic Council would meet again, and he already knew how it would end. For 30 years, Taemin had served as Earth's ambassador to the Council. He had watched the galaxy grow from a collection of warring species into something that almost looked like peace. Almost. The key word was almost, because peace was fragile, and it took work to keep it alive. The council chamber was massive, built to hold representatives from 47 different worlds. Giant screens showed star maps and trade routes. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and alien perfumes. Taemin took his seat in the human section, a small area near the back. They called it the diplomatic wing, but everyone knew it was where they put the species they did not think mattered much. Councillor Veltar entered with his usual swagger. The Valthari were tall, with blue-gray skin and eyes like silver coins. They had the biggest military in the galaxy, and they never let anyone forget it. Veltar's robes were covered in medals and honors, each one telling a story of conquest or victory. The Zephyrian delegation arrived next. They looked like humans, but their skin had a pale green tint and their eyes were completely black. They were smart, maybe the smartest species in the galaxy. They built the computers that ran the banking systems and the navigation networks. They spoke in whispers and always seemed to know things before anyone else did. "Good morning, Ambassador," said Dr. Haijin through his earpiece. She was back on Earth in the Human Diplomatic Corps building in Geneva. "How are our friends today?" Taemin touched his throat mic. "Same as always. Veltar looks ready to start a fight, and the Zephyrians are pretending they already know how it will end." The session began with routine business, trade agreements between the Outer Rim colonies and the core worlds, shipping schedules for medical supplies to the refugee camps on Kepler 442c, resource allocation for the new terraforming project on Ross 1 to 28b. Taemin watched the other delegates argue over details. The Valthari wanted higher prices for their military escort services. The Zephyrians demanded better interest rates on their loans. The smaller species tried to get better deals for their raw materials. Through it all, humans sat quietly and took notes. When species could not understand each other, human translators stepped in. When trade talks broke down, human mediators suggested compromises. When colonies needed help with refugee problems, human psychologists offered solutions. It had been this way for 300 years. Humans were the ones who built the universal translation protocol that let all these different species talk to each other. Before that, wars started because nobody could explain what they actually wanted. Humans created the Harmony Index, a system for understanding how different cultures could work together without fighting. But today was different. Today, the Council would vote on where to build the new military headquarters. It was a big decision, worth billions of credits and thousands of jobs. More importantly, whoever hosted the headquarters would have a lot of influence over galactic defense policy. The humans had proposed a neutral location, a space station built at the exact center of Council space, where no single species would have an advantage. It made sense, it was fair. It was the kind of solution humans always offered. Veltar stood up when his turn came to speak. His voice boomed across the chamber. "The Valthari Empire offers our homeworld as the site for the new headquarters. We have the strongest defenses, the most advanced shipyards, and 3 centuries of military experience. Who better to guard the galaxy's peace than those who have fought the hardest to win it?" The Zephyrian speaker was more subtle. She did not shout or wave her arms. She simply listed facts and numbers. The Zephyrian Collective has the most advanced computer systems in known space. Our security networks are impenetrable. Our location offers the best strategic position for monitoring all hyperspace routes. Logic supports our proposal. When Taemin's turn came, the chamber grew quiet. Not the respectful quiet that greeted important speakers, but the bored quiet that people showed when they already knew they would ignore what came next. "Honored counselors," Taemin began, "humanity proposes a neutral station, a place that belongs to all of us, controlled by all of us. This headquarters should represent our unity, not the dominance of any single species." He explained the benefits: how a neutral location would encourage cooperation, how shared control would prevent any one species from using the military for their own goals, how it would show the galaxy that the Council truly represented everyone. Veltar interrupted before Tai Min could finish. With respect to our human colleagues, this is a matter of military strategy, not diplomatic theory. The Valthari have been protecting this galaxy since before humans learned to build starships. We know what real security requires. A few delegates chuckled. Tai Min felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice steady. The Valthari have indeed provided excellent military service, but security is not just about weapons and shields. It is about trust. It is about making sure every species feels protected, not just the strongest ones. The Zephyrian speaker added, "Perhaps humans should focus on what they do best. Record-keeping, translation services, administrative support. Leave the important decisions to those with more experience in such matters." More chuckles. Tai Min sat down knowing it was over before the voting even began. The vote was not close. 31 delegates supported the Valthari proposal. 12 voted for the Zephyrian option. Only 4 species voted for the human suggestion of a neutral station. That evening, Tai Min sat in his quarters, looking out at the 3 moons of Nexus Prime. His communicator chimed with an encrypted message from Earth. He read it twice, then deleted it. The message was simple. Operation Silent Dawn approved. Begin preparation phase. Timeline, 72 hours. Tai Min poured himself a glass of synthetic whiskey and watched the stars. In 3 days, everything would change. The galaxy did not know it yet, but they had just made the biggest mistake in their history. They thought humans were just clerks and translators. They were about to learn what happened when the clerks and translators decided to leave. He activated his secure communicator and sent a single word to Dr. Hai-Jin on Earth. Confirmed. The galaxy had chosen. Now humanity would choose too. Captain Jinwoo read the orders 3 times before he believed them. The message had come through the most secure channels, encrypted with codes that only 12 people in the galaxy knew. Operation Silent Dawn was not a drill. It was really happening. He stood on the bridge of the UES Endeavour looking out at the Kepler 442 system. His ship was one of 50 human vessels scattered across the galaxy, all doing the quiet work that kept civilization running. The Endeavour mapped hyperspace routes, the invisible paths between stars that made fast travel possible. Without these routes, it would take years to travel between systems instead of days. "Captain," said his communications officer, "we have confirmation from all department heads. They are ready to begin the withdrawal." Jinwoo nodded. In the past 72 hours, every human in the galaxy had received the same message. After 3 centuries of being treated like servants, humanity was leaving. Not with anger or threats, but quietly, like shadows disappearing at dawn. Down in engineering, So Young was already at work. She had spent 10 years maintaining the quantum communication relays that connected the Outer Rim colonies to the rest of the galaxy. The technology was human-designed, but the other species never bothered to learn how it really worked. They just assumed it would always be there. So Young's fingers moved over the control panels with practiced skill. She was not breaking anything or causing damage. That would be noticed too quickly. Instead, she was making small changes, adjustments, that would cause problems later. In a few weeks, the relays would start to fail one by one. By then, all the humans would be gone, and no one would know how to fix them. On the agricultural world of Ross 128b, Dong Hyun was packing his research. For 20 years, he had worked to turn dead planets into gardens. His terraforming techniques had created breathable atmospheres on dozens of worlds, letting millions of aliens build new homes among the stars. The irony was not lost on him. Humans had always been good at making places livable for others. They built comfortable homes, efficient farms, and clean cities. They understood that life was not just about surviving, but about thriving. The other species were so focused on conquest and profit that they forgot about the small things that made life worth living. Dong-hyun sealed the last of his research files and uploaded them to the secure human database. Future human colonies would benefit from his work, but the rest of the galaxy would have to figure things out for themselves. In the Neptune system, Admiral Kyung-soo was coordinating the largest part of the withdrawal. Human ships were spread across 12 sectors, providing disaster relief, medical aid, and rescue services. They were not warships, but they were essential. When pirates attacked a convoy, human ships evacuated the civilians. When a space station lost life support, human engineers fixed the problem. When refugees fled from war zones, human vessels carried them to safety. Now all those ships were quietly returning to human space. Kyung-soo watched the tactical display as ship after ship changed course for Earth. The other species would not notice immediately. They would assume the humans were just rotating crews or restocking supplies. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late. Back on Nexus Prime, Taemin continued his normal routine. He attended council meetings, filed reports, and had polite conversations with other diplomats. Nobody suspected that he was overseeing the largest covert operation in galactic history. The beauty of Operation Silent Dawn was its simplicity. Humans were not stealing anything or destroying property. They were not making threats or demands, they were just leaving. When their contracts expired, they did not renew them. When they finished their current assignments, they requested transfers back to Earth. When asked about their plans, they gave vague answers about family obligations or career changes. Dr. Hyejin monitored the operation from her office in Geneva. Reports came in from across the galaxy. On Vega Prime, human doctors were finishing their shifts at the refugee medical centers and quietly submitting resignation letters. On Alpha Centauri, human teachers were completing the school year and declining to return next term. On Proxima Station, human technicians were training their replacements and booking passage home. The aliens barely noticed. Humans had always been so reliable, so predictable. If a human said they needed to leave for personal reasons, nobody questioned it. If human-run systems started having minor problems, people assumed it was just normal maintenance issues. Min Jun worked frantically in the archives beneath the human embassy. As the galaxy's leading expert on human contributions to galactic civilization, he knew better than anyone how much the other species depended on humanity. They just did not realize it yet. His research showed the truth in stark numbers. Humans had mediated over 2,000 interspecies disputes in the past century. Human-designed agricultural systems fed 3 billion non-human civilians. Human logistics networks managed the flow of goods between 47 different worlds. Human psychological frameworks helped traumatized refugees integrate into new societies. All of this work was invisible to the species that benefited from it. They saw the results but not the effort. They enjoyed the peace but ignored the peacemakers. They lived in the house that humanity built, but they never thanked the architects. The first signs of trouble appeared within days of the withdrawal. Beginning. On the border between Valthari and Zephyrian space, a trade dispute escalated into threats of military action. Normally, human mediators would have stepped in within hours, using the Harmony Index to find a solution that satisfied both sides. Instead, the two species spent days arguing past each other, neither understanding why the other was so angry. Captain Jin-woo watched the situation develop from his ship. The Endeavor was technically still on duty, but his orders were clear. No intervention unless directly asked for help, and even then, only if human lives were at risk. He watched Valthari warships take aggressive positions near a Zephyrian trade station, and did nothing. On Kepler 442c, the refugee camps were starting to show strain. Human administrators had managed these facilities for decades, understanding the complex psychology of displaced populations. They knew how to prevent conflicts between different species, how to distribute resources fairly, and how to help refugees adapt to new environments. Without human oversight, the camps began to experience problems. Fights broke out between refugee groups, food distribution became chaotic. The alien administrators, well-meaning but inexperienced, made decisions that seemed logical but ignored cultural sensitivities. Back on Earth, government leaders watched the reports with mixed feelings. They had hoped for a peaceful solution, a way to make the galaxy recognize humanity's value without causing suffering. But they also knew that sometimes people only appreciated what they had after they lost it. Dr. Hae-jin authorized the next phase of the withdrawal. Human personnel in critical positions began their exodus. The engineers who maintained the hyperspace beacon network, the psychologists who counseled trauma victims, the agricultural experts who designed crop rotation systems for alien soil. Taimin received daily updates on the situation. So far, the other species were too distracted by their own problems to notice the pattern. The Valthari were focused on their trade dispute with the Zephyrians. The Zephyrians were busy calculating the economic impact of the growing refugee crisis. The smaller species were just trying to keep their heads down and avoid getting caught in the middle. But Taimin knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. When that happened, the real test would begin. Would the galaxy admit its mistake and ask humanity to return as equals? Or would pride and arrogance prevent them from acknowledging what they had lost? In his quarters that night, Taimin composed his final report to Earth. In it he wrote, "The seeds have been planted. Now we wait to see what grows from them. I pray it will be wisdom, not just regret." The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between strength and power, between conquering and building, between ruling and serving. Humanity had been the glue that held galactic civilization together, and that glue was quietly dissolving. 3 months had passed since the last human diplomat quietly left their post, and Counselor Veltar stood in the emergency session chamber, watching his perfect galaxy fall apart. The Universal Translation Protocol was failing. Not the computers, or the software, but something deeper. Species that had talked peacefully for centuries were suddenly finding insults in innocent words. Trade negotiations collapsed when partners could not understand each other's real meaning. What should have been simple conversations became shouting matches that ended in threats. Veltar did not understand what was wrong. The words were being translated correctly, but somehow the meaning was getting lost. The Zephyrians kept saying things that sounded logical but felt insulting. The smaller species seemed to take offense at everything. Even his own diplomats were having trouble making their points clear. He missed the human translators, though he would never admit it out loud. They had done more than just change words from one language to another. They had explained what people really meant, helped species understand each other's feelings and cultures. Without them, everyone was talking, but nobody was truly communicating. Across the galaxy, Commander Hak-Jin watched from humanity's last observation post as the Zephyrian collective mobilized its fleet. 3 Valthari colonies had accused Zephyrian merchants of cheating them in shipping contracts. The Zephyrians claimed the Valthari were trying to break legal agreements. Both sides were probably right, and both were probably wrong, but there was no one left to help them figure it out. In the old days, a human arbitrator would have looked at the contracts, talked to both sides, and found a solution that left everyone reasonably happy. The humans had created a whole system for this kind of problem, with rules and procedures that took cultural differences into account. But the aliens had never bothered to learn how it worked. They had just assumed humans would always be there to handle the complicated stuff. Now the Zephyrians were sending battleships to protect their merchant vessels, and the Valthari were talking about teaching the dishonest traders a lesson. A simple business dispute was about to become a war. On the industrial world of Kepler 438b, factory supervisor Jae-won received his final evacuation order. He was the last human on a planet that produced critical components for starship engines. The automated factories could run themselves for a while, but they needed human oversight to handle problems and make adjustments. As Jae-won's shuttle lifted off from the planet's surface, he watched the factories below continue their work. The alien workers did not know it yet, but those factories were about to start having serious problems. The supply chains that brought raw materials from 17 different worlds were incredibly complex, managed by human logistics experts who understood how to balance efficiency with reliability. Without human management, the delicate system would start to break down. Shipments would arrive late or go to the wrong destinations. Quality control would suffer. Maintenance schedules would be missed. Within 6 months, the factories that supplied engine parts for half the galaxy's starships would be producing expensive junk. Dr. Su Jin monitored galactic communications from humanity's hidden research station, and what she saw made her sick with worry. The refugee resettlement programs were collapsing everywhere. Camps that had been models of interspecies cooperation were turning into powder kegs of ethnic tension. The problem was not racism or hatred, at least not at first. It was ignorance. The alien administrators meant well, but they did not understand trauma psychology or cultural integration. They put species together that had historical conflicts, not knowing about ancient grudges. They distributed food without considering religious dietary restrictions. They assigned housing based on availability rather than compatibility. Humans had spent decades learning how to help displaced people rebuild their lives. They knew that refugees needed more than just food and shelter. They needed dignity, hope, and understanding. The human-designed programs had helped millions of beings find new homes and new purpose. Now those programs were falling apart, and millions more refugees were arriving every day from new conflicts. The breaking point came when news reached Nexus Prime about the Dyson Sphere project. The massive stellar engineering project was designed to capture the energy of an entire star, providing power for a dozen star systems. It was controlled by an AI system that humans had built, programmed with human values and human understanding of safety protocols. Engineer Wu Bin watched from his monitoring station as the project's automated systems began to malfunction. The AI was incredibly smart, but it had been designed to work with human oversight. Humans were supposed to make the big decisions, while the AI handled the technical details. Without human guidance, the AI was making choices based on incomplete information. The problem started small. Energy output fluctuations that were within acceptable ranges, but indicated deeper issues. Maintenance schedules that were technically correct but ignored warning signs that human engineers would have caught. The AI was following its programming perfectly, but programming could not account for every possible situation. Wu Bin sent increasingly urgent reports to the Galactic Council, but they were too busy with their own crises to pay attention. The Valthari were mobilizing their entire fleet for war with the Zephyrians. The smaller species were choosing sides or trying to stay neutral. Nobody had time to worry about technical problems with a construction project. But Wu Bin knew that if the Dyson Sphere failed catastrophically, it would not just be a technical problem. The explosion would destroy everything in the star system and send shockwaves through hyperspace that could damage ships and stations light years away. Billions of lives were at risk and nobody was listening. Ambassador Taemin prepared for his final broadcast from Earth's moon. The message would be transmitted on all council frequencies, in every language, using the old human-built communication networks that were still functioning. After this, humanity would cut all ties with galactic civilization. He stood in the broadcast studio, looking out at the blue marble of Earth hanging in the black sky. For 3 centuries, his people had looked up at the stars and dreamed of joining a galactic community. They had worked so hard to earn their place, to prove they belonged among the great civilizations of the galaxy. But belonging was not the same as being valued. Being useful was not the same as being respected. Humans had spent 300 years being the galaxy's servants, and they had finally realized that servants were never truly free. Taemin activated the transmitter and began to speak. His voice was calm, without anger or hatred. He spoke like a teacher explaining a simple lesson to students who had refused to learn. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began. "For 3 centuries, humanity has served the Council and its member species. We have mediated your disputes, maintained your systems, and helped you build a civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect. We offered partnership. You demanded servitude. We gave you our best efforts. You gave us the smallest voice in the decisions that shaped our shared future." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Across the galaxy, Beings stopped what they were doing to listen to the quiet human who had sat in the back of every council meeting for 30 years. "We do not leave in anger," Taemin continued. "We leave in disappointment. You had the chance to build something truly great, a galaxy where every species contributed their unique gifts to the common good. Instead, you chose to repeat the same old patterns of dominance and submission, strength and weakness. You forgot that the strongest foundation is built not on conquest, but on cooperation." The transmission lasted only 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes changed everything. When it ended, Taemin walked to the shuttle that would take him back to Earth. Behind him, the communication array shut down, cutting humanity's last official tie to the galactic community. Across the galaxy, species that had barely noticed humanity's quiet exodus suddenly realized what they had lost. The translators who made real communication possible, the mediators who prevented minor disputes from becoming major wars, the engineers who kept the complex systems of modern civilization running smoothly. The galaxy had wanted to be ruled by the strong. Now they would learn what happened when the strong had no one to help them understand each other, no one to fix their mistakes, and no one to clean up the messes they made. In the emergency council session that followed, Veltar looked around, the chamber at delegates who could barely communicate with each other anymore. For the first time in his long career, the proud Valthari counselor felt afraid. The humans were gone, and the galaxy was tearing itself apart. 6 months after humanity's departure, Counselor Veltar stood in the ruins of what had once been the greatest diplomatic chamber in the galaxy. The crystal walls of Nexus Prime were cracked from weapon impacts. Half the delegate seats sat empty, their occupants either dead or fled to their home worlds. The screens that once showed peaceful trade routes now displayed battle maps and casualty reports. The galactic economy was not just struggling, it was in complete collapse. The elegant network of trade routes, communication systems, and diplomatic agreements that had seemed so natural and permanent had been entirely dependent on human innovation and maintenance. Without humans to keep it running, the machinery of civilization was grinding to a halt. Veltar's own empire was suffering badly. The Valthari military was powerful, but power meant nothing without the resources to fuel it. The factories that produced their weapons and ships depended on materials from dozens of different worlds, connected by supply chains that humans had designed and managed. Those supply chains were breaking down, one link at a time. Raw materials sat unused in warehouses because no one knew how to get them to the right factories. Finished goods piled up in storage because the transportation networks were failing. The Valthari had conquered half the galaxy, but they could not figure out how to move food from farms to cities without human logistics experts. Admiral Kyung-Soo received Veltar's delegation at the edge of the Sol system, his face showing no emotion as the once proud counselor begged for humanity's return. The Valthari ships were battered and running low on fuel. Their crews looked exhausted and desperate. "Please," Veltar said over the communication channel, his voice cracking with desperation. "We know we made mistakes. We understand now how much we depended on your people. The galaxy is dying without you." Kyung-Soo listened in silence, then replied with words that cut deeper than any weapon. "You called us paperwork clerks and mediators. You said we should leave the important decisions to species with more experience. You never realized that paperwork prevents wars, and mediation preserves civilizations." Behind the Earth Defense Fleet, the home world of humanity stood protected by defense networks that made approach impossible. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, building systems that could protect them from any conceivable threat. They had learned from history that when empires collapsed, they often tried to take their former subjects down with them. Dr. Hae-jin met with the alien delegation in a neutral space station at the edge of human territory. The meeting room was simple and functional, nothing like the grand chambers where diplomacy had once been conducted. She carried with her a report that historian Min-jun had compiled over the past months, a complete accounting of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization. The numbers were devastating. Humans had prevented 2,147 interspecies conflicts in the past century alone, using the Harmony Index and other peaceful resolution techniques. Human-designed agricultural systems fed 3.2 billion non-human civilians across 47 worlds. Human logistics networks managed the flow of goods worth over 500 trillion galactic credits annually. Human psychological frameworks had helped 12 million refugees successfully integrate into new societies. Human-maintained communication networks carried 99.7% of all intersystem messages. Human safety protocols in industrial facilities had prevented an estimated 50,000 workplace deaths per year across the galaxy. "We never knew," Veltar whispered as He-Jin presented the data. "We thought strength was about ships and weapons. We never realized that strength was about the bonds between us, and you were the ones who forged those bonds." The Zephyrian representative, her usual calm shattered by months of crisis, added her own confession. "Our computers could calculate everything except what mattered most. How to make people trust each other. How to help them work together. How to build something that lasted. You made it look so easy that we thought anyone could do it." On Nexus Prime, Chief Administrator Sang-Woo watched through long-range sensors as the capital world descended into chaos. The different species, unable to cooperate effectively without human mediation, had split into hostile factions. The Valthari controlled the military districts. The Zephyrians had seized the financial centers. Smaller species fought over whatever resources they could grab. The planet that had once been a symbol of galactic unity was now a battlefield. The crystal spires that had reflected the light of 3 suns in peaceful rainbows were dark and broken. The gardens where diplomats from different worlds had walked together were trampled and burned. Engineer So Young monitored communications from her hidden facility, documenting the collapse for humanity's archives. Worlds that had thrived under human-designed agricultural systems were facing famine. The crops that fed billions required careful management of soil chemistry, water distribution, and pest control. Human experts had spent generations learning how to make alien plants grow on foreign worlds. Without that expertise, the agricultural systems were failing. Crops were dying from diseases that human botanists would have prevented. Irrigation systems designed for specific climates were malfunctioning. As planets experienced weather patterns that no one knew how to predict, entire populations were starving while food rotted in fields because no one understood how to harvest and distribute it properly. Space stations that relied on human-maintained life support systems were being evacuated as their environments became unstable. The artificial atmospheres, gravity generators, and recycling systems that made life possible in space required constant adjustment and maintenance. Human engineers had designed these systems to be as automated as possible, but automation could not handle every situation. The breaking point came when the Dyson Sphere project finally failed catastrophically. Engineer Wu Bin calculated that the energy crisis would force the evacuation of 12 star systems within the year. The massive structure that was supposed to provide clean energy for generations instead became a stellar bomb that threatened everything within 50 light years. The explosion, when it came, was visible from hundreds of star systems. The artificial ring around the star collapsed inward, disrupting the stellar magnetic field and causing massive solar flares. The shockwaves through hyperspace damaged ships and stations across multiple sectors. Billions of beings who had never heard of the Dyson Sphere project suddenly found their worlds plunged into darkness as power grids failed and communication networks went silent. In the council chambers, the remaining species turned on each other with desperate fury. Each blamed the others for driving humanity away. The Valthari accused the Zephyrians of being too cold and calculating. The Zephyrians blamed the Valthari for being too aggressive and proud. The smaller species accused both of treating everyone else like servants. None of them accepted responsibility for the decades of dismissal and contempt that had led to this moment. None of them admitted that they had taken humanity's gifts for granted while offering nothing but condescension in return. War spread across 7 sectors as species fought over the remaining functional infrastructure. The irony was bitter. They were destroying the very things they desperately needed, fighting over resources they did not know how to use properly. Fleets that could have been used for rescue and rebuilding instead turned their weapons on each other. Billions died, not from violence but from the simple collapse of the systems that kept civilization functioning. People starved in the midst of plenty because food could not be transported. They died of preventable diseases because medical supplies sat unused in distant warehouses. They suffocated on space stations because no one knew how to fix the air. Recyclers. The galaxy had thought that civilization was about conquest and control, about being strong enough to take what you wanted. They learned too late that civilization was actually about cooperation and understanding, about being wise enough to build something together that none of them could create alone. And the beings who had taught them that lesson, who had shown them how to work together despite their differences, were gone. Dr. He-jin closed the report and looked at the alien delegates who sat across from her. Their pride was gone, replaced by desperate hope. They had finally learned the price of their arrogance, but learning and fixing were two different things. "We will consider your request," she said quietly. "But understand this, if humanity returns to the galaxy, it will be as equals, not as servants. The age of taking us for granted is over." The delegates nodded eagerly, ready to agree to anything that might save their dying civilization. But He-jin wondered if they truly understood what equality meant, or if they were just desperate enough to say anything. The galaxy had broken itself trying to prove it did not need humanity. Now it would have to prove it deserved a second chance. 1 year after humanity's silent exit, the Galactic Council had dissolved completely. Where there had once been a unified government spanning 47 star systems, now there were only scattered fragments fighting over the ruins of civilization. War raged across 7 sectors, but most of the dying was not from violence. It was from hunger, disease, and the simple failure of the systems that kept billions of people alive. Counselor Veltar made one final pilgrimage to Earth, his ship damaged and his crew starving. The proud Valthari warships that had once patrolled the galaxy were now desperate refugees begging for scraps of fuel and food. His own flagship, once the terror of pirates and rebels, was held together with emergency patches and prayer. The journey to Sol system took weeks instead of days, because the hyperspace beacon network had mostly failed. Ships that tried to use the old routes often got lost in the void between stars, their crews dying slowly as life support systems ran out of power. The galaxy had become a vast dark ocean, and every world was now an island struggling to survive alone. Ambassador Taemin, now elderly and serving as Earth's Prime Minister, received Veltar in the same chamber where humans had once been dismissed, as mere clerks. But everything had changed. The room was smaller, simpler, without the grand decorations that had once impressed visiting dignitaries. Humanity had learned that true power did not need to show off. Veltar entered the chamber looking nothing like the proud warrior who had once dominated council meetings. His ornate robes were torn and dirty. His silver eyes, once bright with confidence, were dim with defeat and exhaustion. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "We never knew," he said, falling to his knees before the human leader. "We thought strength was about conquest and control. We thought power meant forcing others to obey. We never understood that. Real strength was the ability to bring different people together and help them build something beautiful." Taemin helped the alien leader to his feet, his movements gentle despite everything that had happened. Even now, even after all the insults and dismissal, humans could not help but show compassion to those who were suffering. "You are not the first empire to make that mistake," Taemin said quietly. "History is full of civilizations that confused fear with respect, submission with cooperation. The tragedy is not that you made the mistake, but that you made it when you had examples of a better way right in front of you." Dr. He-jin, now Director of Human Affairs, presented the Council's survivors with humanity's conditions for return. The terms were simple but non-negotiable. Humanity would come back to help rebuild the galaxy, but only as equal partners. Never again would humans be relegated to the background while others made the important decisions. Never again would human contributions be taken for granted or dismissed as unimportant. The remaining alien leaders agreed immediately, desperately. They had no choice. Their worlds were dying, their people were suffering, and they had finally learned that they could not fix the problems without help. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. Captain Jin Woo, now promoted to Admiral of Earth's relief fleet, escorted the first human aid ships back to the devastated galaxy. The scenes that greeted them were heartbreaking. Worlds that had Once been gardens were now wastelands. Cities that had thrived for centuries were dark and empty. Space stations drifted silent in the void, their populations evacuated or dead. But humans had always been good at fixing broken things. Engineer So Young began the delicate work of reactivating the communication networks, carefully rebuilding the systems that connected distant worlds. Dr. Su Jin organized new refugee relief efforts, though the displaced populations now numbered in the hundreds of billions instead of millions. The work was harder than it had ever been before. 3 centuries of careful construction had been destroyed in 1 year of chaos and war. Systems that had taken generations to build were gone, replaced by hastily improvised solutions that barely worked. The elegant network of cooperation and trust that had once held the galaxy together would take decades to rebuild. Historian Min Jun recorded the final chapter of humanity's exodus in the Galactic Archives. His words were read by scholars across the recovering galaxy, studied by leaders who wanted to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. They called us soft because we chose cooperation over conquest, he wrote. They called us weak because we built bridges instead of weapons. They never understood that the strength to build is far greater than the strength to destroy, and when the builders leave, everything falls apart. The galaxy learned a truth that humanity had always known. Civilization is not sustained by the strong who conquer, but by the patient who serve. And when those servants are pushed too far, they leave, and everything they built leaves with them. The reconstruction took decades. Admiral Kyung-soo lived to see new trade routes established, connecting worlds that had been isolated since the collapse. Engineer Woo Bin helped design safer systems for stellar engineering, ensuring that future projects would not fail so catastrophically. Dr. Su Jin trained a new generation of trauma counselors, teaching aliens how to help refugees heal from the wounds of war and displacement. Ambassador Taemin lived to see the new Galactic Compact signed, a document that formally recognized humanity's role as mediators and bridge builders. The compact included protections to ensure that no species could ever again be marginalized or taken for granted. It was not perfect, no government ever was, but it was better than what had come before. But the galaxy was smaller now, scarred by the wars that had followed humanity's departure. 12 star systems remained uninhabitable after the Dyson Sphere disaster. Billions of people had died during the collapse, their lives lost to hunger, disease, and violence that could have been prevented. Entire civilizations had been reduced to scattered survivors struggling to remember their own history. The stars themselves seemed dimmer after humanity's silent exit, and some said they brightened only slightly when humans returned. The galaxy had learned that some wounds once inflicted could heal, but never fully disappear. In the new council chambers, built on a neutral station at the exact center of galactic space, representatives from surviving species worked together to rebuild their civilization. Humans sat at the center of the chamber now, not because they demanded special treatment, but because everyone finally understood their true value. When disputes arose, human mediators helped find solutions that satisfied all sides. When new technologies were developed, human engineers made sure they were safe and sustainable. When refugees needed help, human psychologists provided the understanding and compassion that turned strangers into neighbors. But it was different now. The easy trust that had once existed between species was gone, replaced by careful cooperation based on mutual need rather than mutual respect. The galaxy had learned to value humanity's contributions, but only because they had experienced the terrible cost of losing them. Tae Min, in his final years, often stood at the observation deck of the new council station, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was healing, slowly and painfully, but it was healing. Children who had been born during the collapse were growing up in a universe where cooperation was valued over conquest, where building was more respected than destroying. "We came back," he said to his successor, a young diplomat named Bora, who would carry humanity's voice into the future. But we came back changed, and the galaxy has changed too. Maybe that was necessary. Maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Bora nodded, studying the reports from across the galaxy. There were still problems to solve, still conflicts to mediate, still broken systems to repair. The work of civilization was never finished, never perfect, but it was work worth doing. Work that gave meaning to the vast darkness between the stars. The galaxy had wept when humanity left, and it wept again when they returned. Tears of relief mixed with tears of regret. They had learned that strength without wisdom was destruction, that power without compassion was tyranny, and that no civilization could survive alone in the cold vastness of space. Humanity had always known these truths. Now finally, the galaxy was ready to listen and learn. The silent exit had ended, but its lessons would echo through the stars for generations to come. In the end, the greatest victory was not conquest or control, but the simple recognition that every voice mattered, every contribution had value, and every species had something unique to offer the common good. It had taken the near destruction of galactic civilization to learn this lesson, but perhaps that was the only way it could have been learned. The stars continued to shine, and among them, humanity and their partners worked together to build something better than what had been lost. Not perfect, but better. Not without pain, but not without hope. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, where humans still did the patient work of healing and building and bringing people together, the future slowly took shape, one small act of kindness at a time.